When I was challenged to give a title on my introductory remarks here, I gave it the title Wither. I would like to take a bit of a distance from the short-term focus now on the terrible events that are unfolding in Gaza. Let me say, as somebody who called Gaza home for 10 years, it's very difficult to follow the really indescribable cruelty which is applied to a population I came to admire, respect, and love. All the wonderful people of Gaza, among whom I lived for 10 years, makes it very painful to turn on the news every day. But let me first take a slightly longer perspective and then take a short zoom into what we are seeing today and might be seeing in the future. UNRWA now has existed for over 70 years, and it is difficult to imagine living here in Denmark or living in Europe or living practically anywhere else in the world to imagine what a UN agency can mean for a local population, because nowhere else in the world has the UN entered into delivering quasi-government services, actually working as a government. And it is working as a government for over 70 years in Gaza. You cannot turn a corner in Gaza City. Well, today you can, because many of the structures have been leveled with the ground. But at least several months ago, you could not turn a corner without seeing an UNRWA institution. And very much the same in the refugee camps in the West Bank, not to speak of the rest of the Middle East. But what you've seen for these years, and I think it's appropriate to mention on a Women's Day as it is today, what UNRWA particularly and specifically has been meaning to the role and the situation of women in Gaza and the West Bank and in the Middle East. But let's focus mostly on Gaza. In the 1960s, when this was a rather revolutionary thing in the Middle East, all Palestinian refugee children, boys and girls, had access to schools, and you had equal attendance of boys and girls in UNRWA schools for all these years, which means that when you talk about women in Gaza and how they can mobilize and how they can participate and how they can play a role in their society, it is very much because all of them have had the opportunity to learn, to read, write, and have a basic education up to and including 9th grade. And also, and many speakers have commented upon the fact that we, as Denmark, have very little to be proud of in the current situation in the area. There's a very venerable by now institution on the West Bank called the Ramallah Women's College, which was the first institution in the region where women had access to a higher education, to become teachers and other things. So UNRWA has played that enormously important role. When I was thinking about what to say here, I was thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which you probably all know. All human beings have certain needs, and they are sort of organized in a pyramid, where the lowest level must be filled before you can start enjoying other or fulfilling other needs. The lowest level in the pyramid is shelter, food, water, just sheer survival needs. Then comes a need for security, safety. You have to be not afraid of waking up somebody knocking on your door every night. That has not been achieved to the degree that it would be desirable. It was achieved to some degree in Gaza. In the West Bank, it is still very much an unfulfilled need. You have social needs, which UNRWA has addressed with a huge NGO community also, through community-based organizations, women's centers, and other activity centers. These are very important needs, but you have not been able to climb the pyramid to the top when it becomes the question of the needs of self-realization. That's the top level at which we human beings strive to fulfill needs, to realize our potential. And clearly, Palestinian refugees have far from had that opportunity that they should have to realize their needs. They haven't had the opportunity to realize their need for identity, for self-determination, for a dignified level in democratic societies. That has been denied them for all these years. But there's something quite important that you should never forget when you hear about UNRWA, when you think about that organization, and think about why it is so much loved by the Palestinians and so much, should I say, hated. That's a strong word, and it certainly does not go for all Israelis' views of UNRWA, but very many hate them for that very same reason. That is UNRWA's symbolic value or importance to Palestinians. They have rightly felt completely deserted by the international community. UNRWA is the only, for them, remaining reason that they can say, well, there's somebody somewhere in that international system that promised us so much and gave us so little. There's one agency that stands for that, that gives us confidence that we are not totally forgotten, that we do have an international public, sort of, that helps us, sustains us, and gives us the identity as Palestinians. And that is the very reason why UNRWA is such a thorn in the foot of Israel. To them, to the majority of Israelis, and to particularly those who form the government today, UNRWA is a wicked, terrible organization that is falsely keeping alive the unreasonable hopes of Palestinians that they should ever achieve self-government, self-determination, or that they, God forbid, should be given the internationally recognized rights of return when you are a refugee. Without UNRWA, these Israelis think, without UNRWA, the Palestinians would come to their senses and see that this is never going to happen. So why keep an organization that keeps false hopes alive? If we could do away with UNRWA, we would, just like that, have done away with the refugee problem. No UNRWA, no refugees, everybody except the Palestinians can be happy hereafter. And that is the argument you see brought up time and again and why UNRWA is so dangerous. You have seen in the news lately here how this is being actively pursued by the current Israeli government that has been out and with a special reference to Gaza, saying or celebrating, dancing around programs of resuming settlements in Gaza. And if they could only get rid of the last few, not so few, however, Palestinians, the future would be secured in a situation where you had no UNRWA anymore. So if we zoom in today and see what is there left of UNRWA, well, I'm not talking here particularly and only about the decimation of UNRWA staff. 160 UNRWA staff, at least at the last count I heard, had been killed in the course of operations. So they have taken a toll. A great many of the buildings, I think there are only 2 or 3 health centers left in Gaza. The rest have been more or less raided, destroyed, no longer existent. The Palestinian refugees in Gaza had a health system which delivered 500,000 patient visits a year. That's a very solid international public health system that is also really being very much threatened in its very existence now. Needless to say, you can't go to the doctor now as easily in Gaza as you could. But it was a very important part of the infrastructure. They are flattened. You might have seen how the schools that used to serve masses of blue stripe-clad, young, enthusiastic girls and boys learning. Now these schools are intimistic shelter again. We are back to shelters. In the early days, UNRWA could provide tents back in the early 50s. Today, it is the schools that are suffering where the suffering Palestinians have to try to find a roof over their heads for the night. And these schools are also being quickly run down. Many of the institutions have been directly attacked by Israelis and the Israeli army. And I think I hear very little noise about that. Protests, intervention by those countries who have financed these institutions for UNRWA are not really speaking up. That is not what we invested in when we asked UNRWA to build schools, health centers, hospitals. But there's very little that can really be done, or the Israelis are probably hardly noticing it because I haven't seen a great mass of official protests taking Israel to task and holding them accountable for what they have done to these investments. So it is very, very clear that after this long crawling up the pyramid of needs, never reaching the top, but now reaching whatever has been reached, the Palestinians have been sent scrambling, rolling down the pyramid to the bottom, where we are again talking about shelter, need, food needs, clean water, things that are basically inaccessible today. Not that it used to be so easily accessible. Gaza, long before any of this started to happen, had the highest incidence of kidney disease in the world because they have not been able to have safe drinking water for decades. Today, they can get no water at all. That is not in itself a health risk. So, I'm barely half through. I said I would look at tomorrow, so give me 2 more seconds. Israel has made it very clear, the Israeli government, that they envision a day after, a future where there is no UNRWA. They have said as much. Netanyahu has been out saying it, ministers have been out saying it. They are taking upon themselves to dismantle a UN institution that was established by 100 and however many member countries existed at that time. That's for the UN to take an issue with. Should they have other arrangements? Should they not have other arrangements? No need to ask the member states. Netanyahu has spoken, and there will be no UNRWA in the future. I do hope that these Western governments that have been so meek, in my opinion, been so meek in their protest to what UNRWA is suffering and what the Israelis are doing to the Palestinian institutions in the area. That is not for the Israeli government alone and by itself to decide. That is for the international community. We shouldn't be there where the international community is already helping Netanyahu along in his post-war planning by undermining UNRWA further than has already been done by stopping the contributions to the agency. That is, as I said, maligned and often talked about as rotten and talked about as ineffective. I could go on and on about World Bank, World Health Organization, and I won't, but it is a highly effective, highly transparent organization. Israel and all member countries can get a list of all UNRWA staff, and they can check, and they have lists, and how has Israel found out how to level these accusations, where UNRWA is still waiting to see the evidence. Still, since the 22nd of January, it seems to me as if the case might not have been as clear-cut and easy as claimed by the Israelis when they wanted to see UNRWA's head on a platter. Okay, yeah.